I have prepared a PowerPoint, but I think I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint. Let's just have a chat with each other. And if everyone's okay with that, let me just give you an overview of Whizz Education, perhaps the period building up to this, because David touched on the massive period of change that we're going through at the moment. And I think that's really in fact, there's been so much change just in recent years in the market in general, in the conditions upon which we're all operating, the conditions under which schools are operating. And that, of course, affects all organizations that partner with schools, particularly those who want to partner with schools to improve learning outcomes. Then, of course, it's also been a period of incredible change with the technology available. I'm referencing AI in particular. And how do we think about that? How do we approach that? What does that mean for the future? What opportunities and/or challenges does that create? So I'm going to sort of step back and just, Whiz Education has been around for 20 years. We were founded on belief that every child deserves a learning experience that caters to their individual needs and pace of learning. I grew up internationally. Every 2 or 3 years. My parents moved country, and I had the privilege of going to UK state schools, private schools, international schools. I've literally done the whole smorgasbord. And whilst they have many differences, those different dynamics, they have a lot of commonalities. There was, generally speaking, a teacher. There were generally 15 or more pupils in a class, and in some scenarios more than that. And certainly in my working experience, working with schools, not just in the UK, but parts of Latin America. I'm currently in Kenya, and I can tell you some of the rural schools here. I routinely go into schools with over 100 kids in a class. But the teacher has this group of students, and she has typically 45 minutes, and she's challenged with delivering the curriculum. And it's generally very challenging to cater to every child's individual learning needs consistently. What I mean from moment to moment. And so inevitably gaps developed. And I mean, even in the best private schools with 15 kids in a class, that's a small class. I remember a glazed look on some of those children's faces in maths class. And I always remember thinking, well, it shouldn't really be that way. And I was terrible in most subjects, but maths was one of my good ones. But I was bored in maths class, and I thought that shouldn't be that way either. So, anyway, with Whizz Education, we felt there was an opportunity a couple of decades ago where technology was getting to the stage where, certainly with the internet as a delivery mechanism, maybe you could use algorithms to simulate the behavior of a private tutor, i.e., have some kind of diagnostic assessment to find out where a child is at, and then develop some algorithms that would deliver, we felt, interactive lessons that would bring mathematics to life, but to constantly adapt to how the child's getting on. I did private tutoring for a couple of years, and I remember I would find out where a child was at, what did they like, what didn't they like, what did they feel confident in. We would then try and you know, maybe cover some areas of difficulty. If they did well, we would maybe put a little test in front of them just to check. If they weren't getting it, you'd hopefully pick that up and try and explain things in a different way, using a different alternative pedagogy, if you like. If you think about all those dynamics I just discussed, you can kind of codify those. So, Whizz Education's platform was founded on algorithms that simulated that behavior. Now, of course, technology has moved on. There was a lot of machine learning and now large language models. And what's been interesting, because we've done so much research in these fields over the last couple of decades, is that the different types of AI actually fit in different ways. We found algorithms really good at simulating the thinking of a tutor, the dynamics we just discussed. They're not probabilistic. If the child doesn't understand it, explain it in a different way. It's not it's an if-then type scenario. Similarly, we found machine learning really good for when we did 3 years of R&D with universities across Europe. That was funded by the EU's Horizon 2020, but which was lucky because it was really, really, really was R&D where we were looking at voice interaction to pick up the state of mind of a child from moment to moment. If they grunted while they were doing a lesson, That could mean that they just were having an off day and not concentrating and just weren't in the mood, right? So let's adapt for those. And of course, we now have large language models. Um, so let's go a little bit onto that, Dave, because I think that speaks to your question, actually aligns, Maria, with what you're asking, what's coming forward. We found machine learning and actually not that brilliant at simulating the behavior of a private tutor in terms of its decision making, but as I said, good for potentially picking up the state of mind of a child, both from voice and facial interaction. As human tutors, we can look at a child's, facial expressions and body language. So we've done quite a bit of R&D in that area. It hasn't gone to what we call the live production system yet. Um, Frankly, at the time when we did the research, there wasn't enough quorum of child voice data, and voice data in different contexts could mean entirely different things. A grunt in Southwest London could mean I'm bored out of my brain. A grunt in, Thailand could mean they're clearing their throat. So, but there's so much more of that data available now. So I do think that's one of the pathways forward where a platform like Maths Whizz will not only simulate the decision making of a private tutor, but actually be able to pick up the cues of a child's state of mind as they're learning. For us, we've thought a great deal about large language models, and we use them. But funnily enough, perhaps not in the area you might have expected. We haven't introduced them into the tutoring AI itself. Partly because we don't believe in a black box. We want to understand how the tutor works. We need to be very conscious and mindful of child safety, elements of control, and all of those sort of things. Where we are using AI, and one of the reasons we're doing this funding round is so that we can do more of that. But we started anyway. Is if you think about when we're working with a school, our traditional model was it was quite a consultative approach. We would generally work with school leaders and find out what they were trying to achieve. Generally speaking, schools don't buy Maths Whizz because they're bored and have nothing else to do. They typically buy Maths Whizz because they might have an underlying goal or, objective. Maybe it's to bring mathematics to life and bring a joy for the subject. It might be to literally how can we help fill learning gaps and achieve higher standards in the school. Every school has, I mean, there's some similar objectives, but there are really a wide range of reasons that schools might work with us. And we capture that. We try to understand that because we try to remember that schools are trying to achieve certain objectives, of which working with us is merely, you know, hopefully a conduit to achieving that, or at least a contributor. So we pick up that information. We pick up contextual information. Schools publish stuff. It's on their website, but they also tell us, what are the dynamics that go in the schools? What are the parental attitudes and engagements involved? What are the teacher dynamics? How much infrastructure is in the schools? What are the challenges they're experiencing? Um, and so we record that, and as the platform is delivering lessons, of course, we collect a lot of learning data as well. And unlike a lot of platforms that might just have what exercise they've done and what's their usage, in our platform we get very interesting profile data on every child, obviously on every class, eventually a school. How does it compare locally? How does it compare nationally? How does it compare internationally? And so what we used to do was prepare, customized reports for schools, and we'd have our educationists do that. They would look at the goals, they would look at the data that was coming out. And frankly, that's an expensive process. You've got to pay somebody for quite a few hours to do it. And if you think about what they need to be good at, they need to be good at data interpretation. They need to be good communicators. And they also need to understand education pretty well so they can communicate effectively with educators in a meaningful way. So first of all, that pool of people was not as big as you'd think. Plus, it's pretty expensive. And if you had lots of schools, and we had a growing number of schools, it's actually really hard to deliver at any level of scale. So David, one of the things we're using AI right now, we've started, is actually on interpreting the learning data that's coming through in the context of the school and what they're trying to achieve, and then producing customized, insightful, actionable reports. And we've only just started that. Literally in the last 2 or 3 months, we've started using AI for that. Maria, have you received one of these yet? I see you nodding. I'd be
Yes,
interested
we
to get
have.
your thoughts. Now,
S-
please be mindful that it is under human oversight. It's not like we've abdicated this to AI. AI does create a draft and then we look at it. I wonder what your initial thoughts are, Maria. I mean,
It,
just speak plainly, good and bad. I'd like be really interested to hear it.
it was really, really useful, really insightful. I mean, just for people that are on the call, we're a huge school, 900 children, a primary school, and our children are making 1.7 years progress since September. So, I mean, the progress is huge, and especially for our children who are pupil premium and disadvantaged. The reports are so useful because we have to report to governors because obviously anything that involves any expense in schools has to go through our governors. And just to be able to have a one-page overview that shows the impact of something that we're using. So I've been working alongside Lindsay Brownswood just to try and make it so it's more user friendly, because at the moment it's very narrative driven, which is great for me because it gives me lots of insightful information, but it's not great as that one page impactful document. So we've just been working on how, because you are so good at Whizz at being able to give visual data, and so that teachers that and educators that are not so great with data can see it really easily. And so the reports need to echo that, I think. But yeah, it's really interesting, and it's been real insight into how we can move our children forward as well.
You're on mute, Richard.
And thank you, Maria, because that feedback's so useful. And I know you've been feeding back through Lindsay to our product development team, and they're making adjustments literally every week. And you know, interested that level of data, in a sense, has always been available if teachers logged into their reporting platform. But the reality is, teachers are so busy. So we found that it was the old 80-20 rule: 20% dived in, 80% didn't have the time to do so. And secondly, data is all very useful, but sometimes there's a lot of joining the dots to turn that data into contextual insight that's then actionable. And with the best in the world, people don't have time to do that in many cases, the brain space to do it. So I think that's what we're using AI for. We think it's potentially, well, it seems to be brilliant at it. It does need human oversight. It does need a lot of R&D still. We're not there yet. Maria is one of the sort of guinea pigs that's been receiving it and feeding back. But we're getting great feedback. Like yourself, Maria, all the schools that have received it so far have just said, we learned so much from that, a load of insight that we weren't aware of. And I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, when we put our platform in place, the chances of us implementing it truly effectively and optimally from the get-go is actually quite remote. The harsh reality is we need to go through a learning curve in partnership with the school. The school needs to go through a learning curve, and having that insightful data coming through is really important. And from those of you who are looking at Whizz with a sort of investor hat on, it's super important when you go to scale. And as a business model, Whizz Education has two main customer profiles. One is we work directly with individual schools, but we also work with governments who are trying to roll out ICT and education policy. They might have, policies around equity and inclusion, quality in education. And so Whizz has sort of developed a niche over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years of working with governments, particularly in remote, rural, and under-resourced schools. Actually, not just remote, urban centers as well, but where there's been a lot of, shall we say, environmental challenge. Whizz has just sort of developed that kind of niche. So to give you an idea of where we've worked in the past, several states in Mexico, we've worked in about 250 rural communities in Kenya. And in fact, there, as part of a randomized control trial tutored over 100,000 pupils. That was really interesting because actually over a multi-year period, we nearly triple learning progress rates. And so of all the many things I've been fortunate enough and blessed to be involved in, that one's humbled me the most. We learned so much in the process, but to also see it impact a child that would otherwise not have had that many opportunities has been, well, makes it all worth it. And so I've slightly lost my train of thought on that because whenever I think about it, my hair on my arm sticks up. And we've also done programs in Congo, and there you get some serious challenges, I can tell you. So one of the interesting things that we're doing at the moment, and what this fundraiser is really largely about, is taking all the learnings we've had over 2 decades of how to work with schools, the understanding that it's not about putting a platform in place, it's about integrating it into what in the school's environment, what they're trying to achieve, and the human beings involved. And it really is a human endeavor. Education is a human endeavor, as far as I'm concerned, always will be. These are merely tools to empower us. But then the question comes up when you start working with governments, how do you do that at scale? Because the other theme, David, I don't know if you've sort of seen this, all the work you've been doing, but certainly at, I think, primary and middle school level, the last 3 years have been amongst the most challenging for schools with really since the Ukraine war broke out. Energy prices went up, that decimated school budgets, and they're under enormous pressure to sustain or improve education quality and standards with fewer and fewer resources. Maria, I don't know if that reflects your school's situation, but certainly a lot of what we're
Absolutely.
working with.
Education has never been as tight financially as it is right at this moment. So every decision that you make is scrutinized by many people.
Yeah. So we've had now double reason to try and think about how can we deliver really individualized, personalized approach, but at a lower cost than ever. And that's important for scale because if we're doing a government, and right now, for example, I'm in Kenya because we've been approved to roll out nationally based on that randomized controlled trial. So I spend quite a few of my days here in the National Treasury doing those final negotiations. We've just signed an MOU with the DRC, again, building on the program we did just before the pandemic. And so having educators write deep, insightful, bespoke reports wasn't going to scale at that level. And secondly, even for UK, for an individual school, when we were doing that in that way, the cost had to be passed on to the school. And frankly, schools cannot, they want the benefits, but they simply cannot finance it. And it's not, we've had the most challenging well, actually, we've come out of it now, but the previous 2 or 3 years, we had these heartbreaking calls with schools where they'd come up for their renewal dates and they would say to us, we love Maths Whizz, we love working with you guys. We're having to cut back the number of cohorts. We'll do it for years 4 and 5 or, years 2 or whatever. And you're having these most ridiculous discussions because you're thinking, that's not why Whizz was founded, so that a school would have to choose which kids get individualized learning and which ones don't. That's a crazy situation to be in. And so really our current strategy is really about automating everything we've learnt through human interaction over the past many years, trying to automate as in fact all of it if we can, including the bespoke writing, not so that we can have fewer people, but so that the people we have got can have quality conversations with school leaders and really add additional value rather than writing or, doing roster management or basic product introduction and training. Those things can all be automated and delivered more consistently and at a higher quality with the use of AI and other tools. I mean, we've got Marie, have you ever met? I know you know Lindsay Brownsword. You might have also met Andy Clay, who works with schools, and the schools love him. And I asked him, I said, Andy, this was only about 3 or 4 months ago. His job is mainly he works directly with school leadership and teachers and supports their implementation. And I said to him, look, we're planning to automate everything. What's that going to mean for your role? Because one thing that crossed my mind is, his job would be redundant. I thought I'd worked with this guy for a long time, or to have that frank conversation and go, look, this is the direction of travel. He says, Richard, I think this is just the way we need to go, because what that will release me to do is have higher quality conversations with school leaders that I haven't been able to do because I'm too busy doing all the grunt work. And I went, that's so spot on. And it was so forward thinking of him because his role isn't redundant. Actually, his role is about to be promoted to higher value. And that's exactly where it should be, because all the other stuff's being taken care of. And of course, that's the same as we roll out for large scale government adoptions. You want to have all the bases covered. We will still have people working with schools because it is a human endeavor, but they can be doing the higher value stuff. One person can be supporting more schools, and that brings the unit economics down. And so, Maria, I think your school's one of those. For the EF schools, we extended at shall we say, an advantageous price, and it seems to be one that schools are able to manage, whereas the pricing we've traditionally had, because of the cost base we had, has been a real struggle for schools. So, in a way, Maria, your school is one of the schools that's really helping us shape the way forward, and we see really even more personalization, not just in the learning platform, but how it's implemented and how it's reported on and how it's communicated, but at a lower cost. And we believe that will enable wider adoption and hopefully a contribution to education. Let me
Richard,
stop rambling on there for a minute. Let me throw the room some questions.
yeah, I was just going to say
Somebody throw some.
VJ had his hand up a couple of minutes
Oh,
ago, but I
VJ,
couldn't
thank you.
quite find a pause moment.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Richard, you first of all, you mentioned the two aspects of the business. One is for the individual schools, one is for these governments. What is the split there? I mean, how
The
much?
split has radically changed, VJ. Prior to the pandemic, if everyone thought the pandemic would be amazing for us, and it will be, but it wasn't in the short term because leading into the pandemic, nearly 70% of our business was governments actually doing larger scale rollouts, but in truth is they were exotic experiments. These were governments wanting to show that they were trying innovative things, and we would often get contracts to roll out to, well, anywhere. One of the states in Mexico only did 100 schools. Funny enough, the Department of Education of Moscow wanted us to implement in all 1,500 of their schools, and we did for a while. Eventually, we got booted out of Moscow for being British. But for a while, we were tutoring all and then started tutoring 8-year-olds across 1,500 schools in Moscow. As I said, in DRC and in Kenya as well. When the pandemic came, let's just say most of the countries we were working with were managing developing contexts, and they shut their schools, diverted funds to health and sanitization. And I think it was by about April 2021 that fell off a cliff, literally just fell off a cliff. Um, uh, it was interesting how we reacted to it, and only time will tell whether it was the right reaction. I remember even when the pandemic broke, I thought, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be tough for Whizz. We're going to lose. We're going to get hurt here." And just to give you guys an idea, we were turning over just under £5 million a year at that point, and it was plain to me we were going to lose more than two-thirds of that. And well, anyone who's run a business will know that when you lose a small amount of revenue, you lose your profit. When you lose more than that, you start wondering how you're going to pay everyone's salary. It's a tough moment. And in fact, Whizz had 70 staff at that time, and within a year and a bit, we had something like 25. And so that you can imagine it's not fun for anyone.
I've been,
But go ahead.
I've been that soldier.
You've been
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
But this was the interesting reaction in the sense that although we cut back a lot, there were a few areas we actually increased investment because we took the view that the pandemic was going to achieve a couple of things. Firstly, it was an unfortunate thing was it was going to create a lot of learning gaps for many students, and that is a global phenomenon of which we are still feeling the effects today. The second one was I think it was going to accelerate all stakeholders in education's comfort with using digital approaches, whether it's to have a meeting like this or whether it's to deploy it for teaching and learning. And so one of my conclusion or thoughts or views was that sooner or later the governments would come back, but this time they wouldn't want to do exotic experiments with 50,000 kids. They would want to do things that could be rolled out nationally. And that's what, to be honest, when I founded Whizz 20 years ago, my goal has always been to tutor 100 million or more pupils to make a small dent in that challenge I saw in my school upbringing. And for me, the way to do that is to work with individual schools so we really understand deeply and intimately how to move the learning dial, but ultimately to work with governments who would roll out nationally. And frankly, before the pandemic, that wasn't a realistic conversation. It was too mind-blowing an idea to really do that. But I can tell you that's exactly what is happening now. We're having conversations with ministries of education. It's taken them a lot longer. I mean, it's 5 years since the pandemic, and it's only now about to happen. But I think if I spoke to the Kenyan government stakeholders 7 or 8 years ago about national rollout of adaptive learning and democratizing private tutoring, they would have thought I was a sweet guy, maybe he needs to stop drinking so much wine or something, who knows. But now that's the conversation. The conversation now is governments are under enormous pressure to address those learning gaps, to bring equity and quality, and EdTech provides the economically viable and sustainable way to scale impact, but only where it achieves impact. So there's a lot of EdTech that doesn't move the learning dial, as you all know. And so that's why we're very fortunate, Whizz. We have an amazing team. One of the great things is, David, you'll know when you go down from 70 to 25 people, you keep your 25 best people, and they're pretty damn good. And so the people with education know what they're doing. In fact, I would say we're more productive now than when we had 70 people. Isn't that weird? But there you go. Whizz Education is really well run. Sarah Hawkes is on this call. She runs day-to-day operations, makes my life possible, and I'm on planes, and it's really interesting to see, although it's taken a lot of time, what the future holds. And I think it's very large-scale adoptions of EdTech that really works. David, you've got your hand up there now. Please.
Yeah. So, question: How much are you looking to raise with this raise, and what are you using the money for? What's the reason for the raise? Is it core R&D or AI developments you couldn't afford otherwise, or market development, or what, or a combination?
A bit of both, David, because it's a continuation since that pandemic and since we got badly whacked. As I said, we increased our investment in some areas. One of the areas was, and we've raised, this is actually about our fifth or sixth funding round in the last 3 years. We generally done fundraising through individuals. We find individuals, Whizz is not just an investment, it's a feeling, it's a social impact thing. We're actually impacting children. It's what makes me as passionate today about Whizz as I was 20 years ago. I think it's the same with all our staff. And I think our investors, they obviously want to make a return on their money, but they look at what impact we're making as well. And so we found individuals are we're very comfortable working with individual investors. And we had multiple rounds because one of the things we did 3 years ago, we made the decision to refactor our entire technology platform. Because we've been around 20 years, it was on old technology, it was working, but at the end of the day, if we needed to prepare for national scale rollouts, we better have modern, up-to-date infrastructure, code base, all cleaned up. And so we've raised over £2 million in the last 3 years through individual investors. We got 900K of COVID loans, and we invested that into refactoring our technology platform, and that is frankly, largely done. The back of it has been broken, which has been great. And what's so interesting now, the kind of the just to give you an idea, the pre and post. Before doing that, when we would get feedback from schools and we'd be updating our platform or updating the teacher area, and we'd do something and it would take months to go live with it because frankly, as you were improving one area, you were breaking it in two or three other areas and you ended up chasing your tail. It's routinely now we do releases and updates, sometimes minor ones, sometimes major ones, but I think pretty much weekly. I think last year we did 100 releases, in 52 weeks. That would have taken us 50 years for. So we're already seeing the benefit of that. Why is that important? Is because, when teachers give us feedback, when schools give us feedback, we still have a huge priority list. Sometimes it doesn't go on the top priority, but we can be responsive, and that's really important. But also it means we can scale. We can scale so much more easily. So that's what the investment has been used for so far. The last round we did a round in April to July of last year. We raised about 450K. That started really our work with AI and automation, David, and this is a continuation of that. Our plan was to raise 1 million, and we were planning to raise about 400 through equity and about 600 through bank debt. And it turns out banks have become very conservative, and we can't seem to raise any debt at all. I don't know if anyone else has had any of that experience. So by the end of the year, we thought, you know what, we can't keep waiting. We need to keep investing. So we're raising that through individuals, and we thought we'd try crowdfunding, and it is mostly for AI and automation, but also a bit of market development, David, because our intent is to, as we use automation and AI to make quality delivery more scalable and consistent, it also lowers the cost. And we intend to pass those cost savings onto the schools because of their budget constraints. And we think we can do that whilst maintaining our margins. In fact, we've done the maths on it. We can do that. And in fact, some schools like Maria's are already actually on lower pricing than the normal commercial pricing. And we believe we can deliver on that. But in order for the business to grow from an investor's point of view, you need more and more schools to come on so that it becomes a bigger company and investors will make a nice return. So to do that, we need to massively grow adoptions, and there's two paths to that. One of those is the large scale rollouts with governments, which we now foresee coming back on board. Frankly, could be pretty soon. I would say in the next 12 months, I would be expecting Kenya and even possibly the DRC to get to that point. And those will be, Kenya we're talking 20,000 plus schools. It's enormous scale. But also we anticipate a significant growth in adoptions across the UK. In order to achieve that, we're moving away from a consultative sales model, but more from a market awareness model. So we've got very intentional about our marketing, frankly, for the first time in our history, David. With our limited resources, it's a very focused strategy that we're executing, mainly emailing schools around the country. We have access to a database. We email them so that at least they're aware that we exist and what we can do for them. Secondly, we are now consistently engaging in social media. So there are little videos from schools, from hearing from teachers, children, parents. So every week we post stuff now and create a new video. And then the third thing is, because of the approach we're taking, our head of UK schools is now spending more time in the market, but rather than selling to schools, actually engaging with influencers, with maths hubs, with key stakeholders who are looking for data, looking for evidence. And that times really well with the EF study, which actually happened last year. We've been applying to the EF for 15 years to do a study on personalized learning. And finally, 2 years ago, they actually made a call for it. We applied, we won it. We implemented it just over 60 schools in the year that finished July of 25. It turns out it takes the EF a full year to, or the EFs, it's not just the EF, they've got an independent evaluator, NFER in this case. It'll take a full year before the report is actually published. It'll be published, they estimate, in June of 2026, which is coming up. But we did campaign for a quicker release of the report, but we didn't get anywhere. They're gonna publish it in June. They've got their processes. So I think that times very well with the market engagement strategy that we're implementing, David. So essentially, our strategy is automation so we can scale quality, market development so we can increase adoptions, and that we can make it. And because of that strategy, we can make it affordable, reducing the financial barrier for schools, whilst hopefully maintaining margins that enable us to reinvest and continue to invest and grow. Does that answer your question in a really long-winded way?
Answer my question in an excellent way. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, David. It's very kind.
We've just got a question. I think VJ's got his hand up, and then we've got a question in the chat, which I'll go to afterwards.
Okay, it was just a follow-on from David's question. I mean, you said you raised 450 in the last round. So what is the capital raise that you're looking for now? And how much of it is crowdfunding? How much of it is private investor?
So we've been given authorization by investors to raise up to, is it 650, I think? Basically what I was hoping to get through bank debt, VJ.
Okay.
And so far our existing investors have put in, well, actually, in one or two new investors who've just come in privately have put in 125 so far in the last 10 days. And we've, as I recently launched on the Crowdcube platform, and that's just, frankly, it's just kicking off. I think it's just a few grand raised on that so far. But our plan is to, we could raise up to 600, 650. Frankly, we're also still engaging with banks. And if we raise 300, they might agree to put some debt in, so we're juggling the situation, if that makes sense.
And when you say you're spending a lot of this on AI automation, is that an off-the-shelf AI package that you're using as an enterprise model, or is that?
No, it's mostly.
What do you mean by that? Are you using one of the big AI?
Yeah,
models?
we're using one. We're not inventing AI. We're deploying it. So, with AWS, we use AWS hosting infrastructure. They provide us a load of AI platforms that we can choose and use. I think it's more the expertise and the development to make the user experience around it correct, about developing the prompts and the QA and the protections and security around it profound enough and robust. And just as the queries, as the prompts get more and more advanced, taking into account more and more factors, actually a bit of expertise helps. I mean, we've been good at getting an alpha version with amateur hour, if you like, but we have a number of experts that we know and would like to work with, and frankly, we have to be able to pay them. I don't think it's enormous amounts of money. We're not talking about millions of pounds here, but you can't expect people to volunteer their time indefinitely. So, especially when they've got expertise.
And if I may, just one last question. So if these are all the costs, how is this transitioning into your pricing model? I mean, are you moving to a subscription-based model? Is it per student that you get charged? Is it?
Yes. To be fair, we've generally always been like that, where our business model was a level of fees, which covered sort of human engagement and support, and subscriptions for platform access on a per child basis. Because of what we're doing, we're reducing the fees significantly because the amount of human time per school is reducing already, in fact. But we're actually also intending to be able to offer price concessions on the actual platform access as well. Frankly, because we've refactored the platform, it's just much more efficient, and we can do that. Historically, schools were paying about £30 a child for a year of tuition. That is that certainly with the EF schools we've trialed. I think we're seeing if we can afford to deliver it quite a lot lower than that, isn't it, Maria? Is about half that maybe?
Yeah, I think ours is around £12. We've got a
Right.
longer deal, but it's yeah, because £30 is just not doable.
Yeah. If £30 doesn't sound like a lot, VJ, because you think, wow, for a year of tuition for a child, £30, my God, if you spend a human tutor 1 hour, it would be 50, 60 quid. But for schools, and certainly our ambition is for schools not to have to make that choice of just offering it to one class or one cohort, they to cover all their students. Well, if you've got 250 children in the school, that's £7,500. Well, for UK schools right now, look at Maria's head. That throws it out the water for her. She just can't play. It's not even whether she wants it or sees a value. She just can't play. Um, and and that also applies when we go to national scale on some of these big rollouts. Your unit economics have to come right down. So I think we're at the moment with our research schools offering £12 a child, and if it's successful and we can complete and the investment allows us to fully deliver all the automation and AI, we might be able to pass that on to, in fact, make that our main business model. So
So that's
affordable.
the £12 is the biting point at which the business is viable, or the schools have a take up at least.
Certainly the UK schools, I would say that the dynamic is different in different markets. So we have a similar sort of price point in New Zealand where we do very well. The US, it's somewhat higher. We've never had a problem charging a level that was more than our competitors. That's never a problem. So in the US, for example, a lot of ed techs are $10 a child. There we are still charging around $36 a child. And if we go head to head with a competitor, we normally win because we offer a lot of value. Where that really becomes redundant is when affordability comes into it. If we're in a market where value is the driving factor, we can sustain even our old pricing. And as I said, at the moment in the US, that's where we're priced, and we've got a fledgling operation there, but it's doing well. Um, it's got off to a very good start. Uh, But in the UK, it's not about value. It's literally they cannot afford it right now. Most schools are running deficits. You know, I'd love a Rolls Royce, can't afford it. It's
Mm.
just not a,
Okay.
it's not a. So, but if you think about Whizz Education's mission, which is to enable communities around the world to reach their full potential, and my personal goal of tutoring 100 million pupils, we've got to make finance not a barrier. We need to get paid, rightly so, for doing a good job and delivering learning outcomes, but we need to remove the barriers that prevent adoptions and that prevent learning from happening.
Thank
And I
you.
think now we can do so and make money on the way. I don't think anyone begrudges Whizz if it makes money too. Ooh, I'm going to have to plug this computer in, guys. There's a question in the chat. You go for it while I move around and find a plug in this place.
Yep. So the question in the chat is around evidence and presence of Maths Whizz in particularly in Southeast Europe, such as Romania, Moldova, or Ukraine.
Great question. I would say if we do have a presence there, I'm not even aware of it, bluntly. Saying that, we just literally in the last week or so, and we put out on social media yesterday, EdTech Insights Europe magazine just awarded us Virtual Tutor of the Virtual Tutor of the Year award. And that's going out to all, that's an online and physical publication that goes out to stakeholders across all of Europe. So we might be better known after this week than we were a week or more ago. We've never really had much of a presence in mainland Europe. It's not that we have anything against it. It just we focused on the UK historically, and then we started working with internationally, but more so with in countries where large scale adoptions were possible. As I said, so that's how we got to Moscow. On the back of that, the UK Aid, or the Department for International Development, was looking for innovative approaches that could help children in impoverished communities, or marginalized communities, as they called it. And because we'd had success, and really great success actually in Moscow, tutoring 100,000 7-year-olds, training several thousand teachers, we applied, and to our shock, we were granted. And so there we found ourselves tutoring 100,000 children in rural parts of Kenya. Then on the back of that, DRC started working with us, and we just developed this specialism and expertise in delivering one-to-one learning in frankly impoverished settings. It's a bit of a niche capability. And so somehow mainland Europe just didn't come into it. So yeah, short answer to that is we don't have much of a presence at the moment. We are absolutely open to it though.
I would say in terms of methodology, though, I think the methodology for Maths Whizz itself really applies across borders, with some contextualization and adaptation. That personalized methodology really is as relevant in the UK as it is in Kenya and other countries as well.
Very much so. Very much so. I think the thing that changes is the context, the barriers and challenges that you might need to overcome to enable access, the level of community and teacher hand-holding. You know, when you work with a British school, you're probably dealing with schools that are familiar with devices. They know ICT is part of school delivery. They'll know how to, you know, whereas if you go to a rural part of Congo, they've never seen a device before. They might have an old Nokia phone. They're wondering whether all this stuff is going to replace them. That's their first and biggest concern. So you're just dealing with a whole bunch of different challenges. But ultimately, the concept of supporting a child at their point of need and at their pace of learning is universal. We're yet to find a context that doesn't benefit from that. In fact, you know, David, you asked me about the future. I do think for us, AI is, you know, people ask me when LLMs are coming out, gosh, does that threaten your business? Does that threaten your very existence? And I went, you know, I really don't think so. I think what Whizz does is more than that, but AI is actually a supportive tool for us that we can deploy. And I do think that, and I've always felt this even from 20 years ago, when I started to see the results and the impact. And I must tell you guys, I have a 9-year-old child, and my son would, you know, rather be out in nature than learning maths at school. Academics is not his favorite thing to do. And when he was 4 or 5, I think sort of, was it foundational year 1, the pandemic, there were school lockdowns. We went off to Brazil for 2 weeks, got stuck out there for 6 months. He missed a load of schooling. When he finally went back to school, I remember one day just asking him some really simple maths questions. Bear in mind, I did maths at Oxford University. I could do maths as long as I can remember. I was good at maths, you know, from my first conscious memories. And I naturally assumed my son would be not dissimilar. Well, it turned out that wasn't the case. And I was like very shocked. I was going, oh my goodness. And we had the opportunity to, I was going to Kenya so much. This was 3 years ago. We decided to do a term in Kenya, to do the winter, January, February, March. And one of the top private schools near where we were staying had been a Maths Whizz user for many years. And so I told my wife, said, we don't need to go inspecting lots of schools. That's the school he's got to go to. And this is a private school, and they charge $30 a term to parents for Maths Whizz access. And my colleagues were laughing at me. They went, Richard, you're paying for Maths Whizz. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm paying for the school to tell him to use it. And sure enough, one day my son came home from school. Just before that, we did some national tests. I can't remember. No, that was, yeah, around that time. I think we did some NFER tests, and he was in the bottom quartile in the UK, matching my perceptions. And I go, oh my God. And he came home one day and he said, look, I need to, Dad, I need to do Maths Whizz. I said, well, if the school told you, you better do it. And we were only there for one term, but he's kept it going since then. So he's been doing it 4 years. He's now back at that school and they all do it. But I had him tested about a year ago back in the UK. And 3 years after starting in Maths Whizz, he was in the top quartile in the country. And one day somebody came round and asked my son what was his favorite subject. And he said maths. And I almost fell off my chair. And so I always had confidence in what we were doing, but I have absolute conviction because I see it in my own son every day. And I don't think his gaps would have been easily picked up consistently. I don't know that maths would have been the way it uses interactive anime appeals to my son and he just engages with it. Every child's different. So all those different types of input make a difference. So I really do think it's universal. Whether it's a child in rural Kenya or a child going to a top private school, having tuition that is engaging and right at their point of need, it's universal. By the way, guys, I can talk about this stuff for hours. If you,
I was
you know,
just going to say, should we
yeah.
do a time check because it's 9
Yeah, we
a.m.
ought to.
now?
I can bore you to death. If any of you are ever struggling sleeping, you just send me a WhatsApp and you say, Richard, do you want to talk about, ed tech and how to move, and education and all that stuff? Geez.
VJ?
Richard, you did mention when you were talking about in the US, your competitors, you found it easier to price there. Can you give us an idea of what is the competition, both not only in the US but globally?
Yeah, it's a really nuanced question there, VJ, because in different markets you have different competitors, and in fact, let's just go through them. I will come to the US, but I'll start with some of the government large-scale programs. Our competitors there are not other platforms. Our competitors there are other ideas. There's just a limited capacity of government bodies to process. There's only so many initiatives they can process. And so we'll be competing with other ideas there, I would say, not necessarily other maths platforms. So I don't really feel like I have many maths platform competitors. In Latin America, there'll be blah, blah, blah. Gosh, what are they called? Sarah, can you remember? I'm having a brain blank. There is another maths platform that does very well in Latin America. But generally they're not our competitors, it's other ideas. And one of the ways we protect against those or compete is luckily, I have a financial background and some of our investors have good financial introductions. So in many cases with governments these days, we're sourcing the funding for them as well, whether it's in the form of grants, philanthropy, sovereign finance, debt finance. But we're generally showing up to ministers of education. And if they like what they see, we're saying we can also prepare a finance package for you. And that just elevates the level of seriousness of the conversation. So to give you an idea, the national rollout in Kenya that we're working towards, we have 100% of the finance sourced on the table for them. But we're essentially competing with other ideas and other agendas, VJ. When we go to working with individual schools, then the competition is more, platform and competitive providers, but it's very geographically different. So the competitors in the UK are largely different to the competitors in the US. And in the US, it'll vary from state to state. So, you might have heard of platforms like Alex, ALEKS. There'll be some approved providers. For example, we're starting out in Dallas or in Texas. And so there'll be some Texas approved platforms that we've never heard of anywhere else. But they'll be looking for platforms that are aligned to the TEKS, which is the Texas curriculum, their scheme of work that matters to them, that is kind of becoming more common across Texas, is Blue Bonnet. So our stuff is literally is in the process. In a couple of weeks, it'll be aligned to Blue Bonnet. Whereas in the UK, what are the platforms that schools might be aware of? They'd be aware of probably Mathletics. That's not really a virtual tutor, but it is a maths platform, and so schools only have so much capacity. Century Tech, to some extent. Um, what's Doodle Maths, for example? Another one. They would be the main competitors in the UK. In New Zealand, it would be Mathletics, because it's ultimately an Australian company. There is one other one that I've forgotten the name of.
Is it Matifique you're thinking of?
Matifique, yeah. Matifique, yeah. They're actually present in New Zealand, not so much in the UK or the US. You don't hear of them there. But they're doing quite well in Latin America. So that varies, Vijay.
Thanks.
Why don't for those, it's after 9, so actually my apologies, this has gone on a lot longer than I thought. Let me do a little wrap up, and if anyone's got any questions, just put them in the chat. We'll record them and reach out to you directly, if that's okay. As you've probably gathered from this, Whizz has been on a bit of a journey in the last few years, but I think it's emerging really strongly. Already we're seeing some of the work that we're continuing with this round having a great effect. Our renewal rates in the UK for schools as of this financial year, this school year, are back up to over 90%. They're 92%, which is a pretty, I think, decent renewal rate, and it's trending upwards. That marketing strategy I talked about, we really only started implementing it from September with real, the system really being in place. And what's interesting is our first quarter of the year, the first term, was one of our best ever for lead generation. And in the last quarter, which was the November, December, end of January, we more than doubled our inquiries and leads from schools. So that seems to be working. We're really excited about that. So we're tracking, we've got this plan to roll out to 2,000, between 2,000 and 4,000 UK schools within 3 years of the EF study being published. And frankly, we're tracking that. And we know it's possible because our first ever product, which was literally a library of digital content, we did sell to 4,000 UK schools. So we think we can do it again. And so far, the renewal rates and the lead growth is aligning with that. In addition to that, as said, it's taken probably 3 times as long as I hoped it would, but the government side of things does seem to be playing out the way I'd anticipated. The discussions are all around large-scale rollouts. Literally, the deal sizes are 10x or 100x bigger than pre-pandemic. And I think we're well positioned in everything we're doing, from the financing, from the track record. Fortunately, a lot of the stuff we did pre-pandemic was under randomized controlled trials. And then, of course, with the EF study coming out as well, we've got the evidence base, the finance, the track record, and the expertise. And so it's simply a case of, executing and having the patience to see this through. Finally, in terms of, for those of you thinking with your investment hats on, we even though we're 20 years old, we have got EIS status. We just got advanced assurance a couple of weeks ago. If you are UK based, you probably know what EIS benefits are, but essentially, you invest £100 and you've been paying income tax, you'll get 30 of that back, your income tax back on that. So your downside is at least partially protected at 70%, and your capital gains are tax-free. So it's an effective shelter. At the same time, private companies are generally illiquid. Things don't always go to plan. So I've got to also say, so that you've got full transparency. If you become one of our investors, there is always risk involved. The only thing I can promise you is giving it 100%. I will always do that. And you'll always hear straight up the good, the bad, and the ugly from me. That's the way it is. And that's the proposition, guys.
Great. Thank you very much for the webinar.
Thank you. And thanks for all the discussion. It's much better than a PowerPoint, I think. And David, lovely to see you. Thank you. I think
likewise.
I think some of the others had to shoot off. If
Yeah,
any of you got,
people have dropped out, but
yeah, if any of you got any more questions, do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll share my email address if you don't have it already, and happy to continue the discussion.
All right.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Sarah.
thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Bye.
Cheers.